Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of the Very Cold Lasagna podcast, your filthy casual place for all those filthy casual takes on the world of sports. I'm your host, DylanLasagna. This is episode number 148 of this icy yet spicy podcast. Today, we got a good show for you all because it is the month of July officially, and that means we are kicking off NFL season preview month. It is part one of our month-long series, and we're kicking it off with the one division that, well, we started off last year, and we'll actually discuss which one that is in just a little bit. But that being said, I'm ready to talk about some NFL football once again after, what was it, like a 2 to 3 month hiatus? It seems pretty long ago, but it actually went by pretty quick after the NFL draft ended. But anyway, I digress. Whether you're a football fan or not, whether it's a hardcore or casual fan, I hope you're around to see me talk about some NFL football in the most filthy casual way possible once again as we get ready for the 2023 NFL season with NFL Season Preview Month 2023. NFL Season Preview Month 2.0. So yeah, once again, I'm very excited to talk about football here on the channel, on the podcast once again, and I hope you are too. So yeah, make sure you stick around. Before we get into the rules, the groundwork of NFL Season Preview Month, a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Make sure you follow Very Cold Lasagna on social media at Very Cold Lasagna on Twitter and Instagram. If you're listening to this on audio, make sure you rate and review the show, whether it's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Your feedback means the world to me. And if you're listening or watching this on YouTube, wherever it is, leave a like, comment, share, subscribe, do all that good stuff. And make sure to watch it the whole way through. And it definitely will help the growth of Very Cold Lasagna on the YouTube side. And we definitely have been experiencing some growth, especially with the wrestling content that I've been putting out during the down period of the NFL season. But let's keep it going with all this football content I'm going to be putting out as well for the rest of the year with the NFL season as the season comes along. So for all whether you're a wrestling fan or an NFL fan, make sure to stick around to Very Cold Lasagna. And an announcement, real quick announcement, for all my wrestling fans out there, I will be having a Money in the Bank podcast episode. I will be watching that show. It's just a matter of when that review will be going up because obviously we are just kicking off NFL Season Preview Month. But rest assured, I will be figuring out how to get that review up and going for you guys. So rest assured there. So that's it for all the announcements. That's it for all the housekeeping. Let's get into the real business, shall we? So we've officially begun NFL Season Preview Month 2023. And before we officially kick off our 4 teams that we're going to be talking about here today, I want to lay down a little bit of ground rules of what exactly we're going to be talking about here for the month of July for our season preview month. So in case you weren't here for the first go around last year where I talked about all 32 teams in the NFL, that's basically what we're doing here. Pretty much talking about all 32 teams in the NFL, just like I do with season recap month, except we're going to be talking about their preparations for the upcoming season. In this case, it's the 2023 season in the upcoming 2 months. So unlike with season recaps, season preview episodes are going to be by division. It's going to be like there's 4 teams in the NFL, in each NFL division. So it's like this team, that team, this team, that team. And there's basically going to be 8 episodes dedicated to all 8 NFL divisions and those 4 teams in that division. So I know you can probably hear a hairdryer in the background, but I don't care. I got to keep this going. So the order in which each team is discussed is going to be from worst, so that's 4th to 1st. Yeah, that's pretty much how this is going to go. The main points I'm going to be talking about in each season preview episode is the summary of the team's season prior, so like a brief mini season recap. Some of the moves that they made in the offseason that either made the team better or worse on paper. Some of the relevant key offseason events that happened that, again, made the team better or worse. Some of my biggest takeaways from their offseason, like kind of like a summary of like all those events coming together. and looking at some of the key games of the season and what kind of impact they can have by then. And of course, the biggest questions and concerns that I have going into the season for that particular team. So every preview is subject to change as especially if we get much deeper into the season preview month, because training camp and preseason will probably have either started or just started by the time most or all team previews have released. So just keep that in mind. And also keep in mind that this does not take into account of what has already happened with the off-season team activities in May and the mini camps that happened a couple weeks ago in June. So also remember that these team previews are from the eyes of a filthy casual fan. So don't expect me throwing out all these statistics or like all these specific player names and all that, or like all these background notes of all these player names. So again, this is from the eyes of a filthy casual fan. So that being said, let's get into our first set of teams here in season preview month. So we begin our trek into NFL season preview month with my team that's in this division, and that is the NFC West. So when we looked at the NFC West last year in this particular spot, one of those teams was the defending Super Bowl champions housed in this division. And when I talked about this team, they had a great opportunity to repeat as division champions, while the rest of the division, they had various questions regarding specific spots, especially regards to the quarterback position. However, by the time the season ended, one team massively disappointed, particularly that Super Bowl defending champion, and one team nearly they made the NFC Championship game, but couldn't make it all the way. And there was another team that made the playoffs, and they were a surprise team. Now, here we are in July, just several months out from that end of the season. As we look at these four teams into the NFC West 1 year later, while it's clear which of them will be competing for the postseason and whom won't, there's one question that remains for all these teams, whether major or minor. And it's a common one that they have. And it's kind of the same one that they had last year as well. What do they make of the quarterback position? So we'll see what kind of answer we can have in either of these team previews. So let's get into our first team, shall we? So we begin NFL season preview month in part one of our season previews. We're taking a look at the birds in the deserts. And what am I talking about exactly? Of course, it's the Arizona Cardinals. My expectations for Arizona trace back to their previous season in 2022. And actually, the last couple of seasons, to be exact, because under the Cliff Kingsbury regime, their last two seasons prior to the 2022 season, you had all these great first half starts for Cliff Kingsbury and the Cardinals, and then you all had these second half collapses, including in 2021 where they did so well, and then they started to do terribly, and then they had the playoff loss to the Rams where they got absolutely embarrassed in prime time on Monday night in that wild card game. So going into 2022, you had another season full of high expectations where they traded for DeAndre Hopkins. You got Marquise Hollywood Brown in the lineup, but they flopped massively. Yet again, highly inconsistent play and coaching all around. And then midway through the season, you started suffering all these key injuries that just kept on piling on as the year went on. And that the biggest cherry on top of those injuries was one torn ACL to starter Kyler Murray. So especially late in the year. And then they finally made the move after the season ended to fire head coach Cliff Kingsbury, being shown the door, being given his pink slip when, to be honest with you, he should have been fired after the embarrassing playoff loss to the Rams in that wild card game. So kind of odd that they did this now, but hey, it is what it is. So looking at this offseason for the Rams, I mean, it was obvious that they had to find a head coach that could lead this what apparently looks like a rebuild for them. It looks like a rebuild. It kind of looks like a throwaway year for them. So they replaced Cliff Kingsbury with former Eagles defensive coordinator Jonathan Gannon. Jonathan Gannon, we don't know how he's going to be as a head coach. We know how he can be as a defensive coordinator. He led the top passing defense in 2022 with the Eagles, but obviously, as we saw in the Super Bowl, he didn't do exactly well with this play calling against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. But then again, you can't really expect much when you're playing against Mahomes and the Chiefs. So it's hard to stop. They also hired a new general manager in Monty Ossenfort, who replaced the resigned Steve Keim. And there were some other notable events during the offseason. Obviously, you had the retirement of defensive end J.J. Watt. That was well known before the season ended. And then they also released top receiver DeAndre Hopkins. A little bit of a strange move. Maybe it was a cost-cutting move. But yeah, that apparently happened. But at the same time, you don't really have a top receiving option for Kyler Murray when he does come back from that ACL injury. So, yikes. So, looking at all these moves so far for the Cardinals in this offseason, well, the top goal for the 2023 season should be establishing that new relationship between Kyler Murray and Jonathan Gannon. It's kind of going to be pretty hard to do so when they basically don't have really much anything to work with. So when I looked at their offseason priorities, when I talked about them in my season recap, obviously one of the biggest ones was retooling that defense because there was no pass rush to speak of, even when J.J. Watt was there. Zach Allen, had a solid year, but he's now on the Denver Broncos. So, yeah, there's not really much to work with there with the pass rush. They did re-sign Colt McCoy because while Kyler Murray is injured, they also need to add another quarterback though. More on that in a little bit. So at least Colt McCoy for the Cardinals is going to be running your offense for about a month or so until Kyler Murray comes back. They also needed to add to the offensive line because the pass protection was not exactly great. Kyler Murray once again had to run around in circles for the better part of the season, and which led to his injury, unfortunately. Looking at some of the additions and subtractions of the season, they re-signed Will Hernandez, one of their offensive linemen. They did lose linebacker Marquise Goldwyn. They released him. I guess another cost-cutting move. Center Rodney Hudson. They also released him, but he wasn't really doing that well anyway for the offensive line. They also released Robbie Anderson. He wasn't really a notable player. I think they also traded for him mid-season. So, yeah, not really much of a loss there. But again, you don't really have much options at receiver other than Marquise Brown and Rondale Moore. So your options at receiver for Arizona, especially when Kyler Murray comes back, are pretty sparse. So, yikes. They did add one big addition to the defense, and that was linebacker Kaiser White. He did pretty good for the Eagles in their Super Bowl run. Receiver Zach Pascal from the Eagles, but he didn't really make that much of an impact. They did add corner Rashad Fenton from the Kansas City Chiefs, but he was getting frequently torched. Defensive lineman Carlos Watkins from the Dallas Cowboys. He's a decent rotational player, I guess. During the draft, they did make a couple of decent, solid moves there. I did like the drafting of offensive tackle Paris Johnson Jr. from Ohio State. He is a pretty good a tackle, whether it's going to be right or left. He will be doing pretty well. I think he's going to be a pretty good addition to protecting Kyler Murray or Colt McCoy, whoever's going to be at quarterback for the offensive line. Corner Garrett Williams from Syracuse, so he could be a good boost to that defense. And then adding that quarterback that they needed behind Colt McCoy for the next month or two. I mean, maybe a pet project quarterback if Kyler Murray bombs. Clayton Tune from Houston. Who knows how he turns out. But my biggest takeaways from this Cardinals offseason, it's clear that they couldn't do anything. They could barely do anything because, well, they gave Kyler Murray a big fat contract extension from last year. And it couldn't allow them to, get like good pieces on defense, or like add anything to the offensive line. It's like those big fat contract extensions that you gave Kyler Murray and Cliff Kingsbury, who you fired, by the way. Yeah, those resources are gone. But, they at least did help themselves by having a nice draft. Like I said, the Paris Johnson Jr. pick with the 6th overall pick was a good addition to the offensive line. again, it's not going to solve all your problems in the world, but having a good piece to the offensive line, especially on Kyler Murray's, I think it's going to be his blind side, is going to be good for you. So looking at some of your key games of 2023, obviously it's going to be week 1 in Washington against the Commanders. You're going to see how Colt McCoy is going to run things in the first game. So obviously Kyler Murray. Maybe week 5 is when we first see Kyler Murray back against the Cincinnati Bengals. Let's see what kind of rust he'll shake off. How is he going to move against what could be a dangerous Cincinnati pass rush? But we'll see. Let's see how he'll be able to react in that game time situation against the Bengals in week 5 in what could potentially be his first game back. So some of my biggest questions entering the 2023 season for the Arizona Cardinals is obviously, what is Kyler Murray going to look like when he does come back fully healthy? Like I said, with a couple of quarterbacks that had torn ACLs in my season reviews last year, they've looked and played normal as such after a major injury, but a lot of others, not so much. I use Carson Wentz as a big example because he fell off massively. I'm not saying Kyler Murray will fall off massively, but we have to wait and see, because even before he was playing, before the torn ACL injury is like he was okay. He's okay. He did make these nice passes, these good off the script throws, but it was just like he was making some weird decisions all the time as well. And considering you only have studied, hopefully not playing Call of Duty, the new playbook of his offensive coordinator, it'll be interesting to see how he operates that offense once he is ready to come back. I'm pretty certain that he probably won't be doing like actual physical drills during training camp, or like maybe next month in August. I don't know. Like, who knows how Kyler Murray is progressing during his rehab. So, in a lot of ways, despite a good draft, Arizona's lack of activity and free agency, it really made things difficult for them. I'm not sure how Monty Ossenfort navigated through that process, but certainly the results not looking good so far in their first year of, again, what's looking like a rebuild. So with or without Kyler Murray, and you honestly have a brutal schedule overall. Brutal because of that downgraded roster. In my opinion, Arizona, it looks like they're staring at the goal of the first overall pick in the 2024 draft. And I know that's kind of being harsh, but let's face it, this roster is just not looking great. It's really not looking great. And you're not having Kyler Murray for the first month or so, it's going to put you in the hole even further. So I'm going to go 3-14 with my prediction, my season record prediction for them. And I say if they squeak out a win against Washington, but everything else after that, who knows? It's anyone else's game. So we continue our trek into the NFC West Division by taking a look at the team that was supposed to make at least a playoff run, but ended up massively disappointing for various reasons for worse. And that was the reigning, defending Super Bowl 56 champions, the Los Angeles Rams. Looking at the Rams' previous season, they obviously, like I said, were supposed to be coming in as the reigning, defending Super Bowl champions, expected to go on at least a playoff run. And honestly, I predicted them to have a really good chance at repeating in the NFC West. But their all-in approach for Super Bowl 56, that title, really caught up to them. They suffered a lot of offseason losses and injuries to many of their starters, including to Matthew Stafford, their starting quarterback, and to their top receiver in Cooper Kupp. Really affected them when it was all said and done, en route to perhaps the worst season by a defending Super Bowl champion. They ended up at 5-12, and here they were at this point of the offseason, still not really having many resources to look out towards. So even though you're getting most of your people back healthy, not exactly a lot to look forward to this offseason. So when you look at the priorities that I had, when I looked at the team needs that they needed to address this offseason, when I talked about them in my recap, One of the biggest things that they needed to address was that offensive line, because keep in mind, they lost guard Austin Corbett to the Carolina Panthers in free agency last year, and they lost Andrew Whitworth after the Super Bowl to retirement. So they lost key starters in the offseason prior. And Matthew Stafford was getting relentlessly hit, including that season opening game to Von Miller, who was on the Bills now. So they needed to revamp that offensive line, because if they wanted to prevent Matthew Stafford from getting injured again, they needed to protect him. So the other thing about Matthew Stafford is that they needed to find a backup for him, because when they got Baker Mayfield late in the season, I mean, he did okay, but then after that game against the Las Vegas Raiders, he was relatively inconsistent, like he was for a large chunk of the season when he was with the Carolina Panthers. So you either needed to re-sign Baker Mayfield or find at least a reliable backup behind Matthew Stafford that perhaps maybe you can even groom behind. And then obviously you had to find some help for Aaron Donald, because, yeah, after Von Miller left in free agency the offseason prior to go to the Buffalo Bills, is basically back to Donald being that one-man wrecking crew before they went out and got Von Miller for that Super Bowl run. So when you look at this offseason for the LA Rams, you at least got Sean McVay coming back. He's going as the head coach. But for the rest of that, though, there's a lot to digest. There's honestly a lot to digest for the LA Rams, because their approach to this offseason was a lot of addition by subtraction. So looking at some of their offseason moves, perhaps the biggest one of all comes on their defense. They traded away cornerback Jalen Ramsey to the Miami Dolphins. And when I first saw the trade, I think that was back in March, I believe, it was very questionable why they did that. Maybe it was a cap-saving move. I don't know. Either way, it was just a very odd decision to trade perhaps your best defensive player, other than Aaron Donald, of course, in the secondary, because it's just weird. Now, all of a sudden, your secondary is very bad without Jalen Ramsey. So, kind of odd to do that. So, they traded away Jalen Ramsey. They also traded away Allen Robinson, but he was pretty much worthless for you, to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So, they traded him away. Baker Mayfield goes to the Tampa Bay Bucks to try and compete for the starting spot against Kyle Trask. You also released Bobby Wagner. Also pretty weird. They also released Leonard Floyd. Also pretty weird. So 2 of your starting linebackers gone. Wagner actually ended up signing back with the Seahawks, and Floyd signed with the Buffalo Bills. So rough, very rough sledding for the Rams. And your special teams unit is gone. Matt Gay went to the Indianapolis Colts. Punter Riley Dixon went to the Denver Broncos. So you already had needs to address. And unfortunately, they didn't do it because, well, their all-in approach, yeah, it ended up costing them. And they had no resource. They barely had any money in terms of free agency. So they went on to get a tight end, at least, I guess, if that's worth something. Hunter Long from the Dolphins from that Jalen Ramsey trade. And then well after the draft, well after free agency, they at least kind of addressed their running back situation by adding Sony Michel. But let's see how well he's worth. He did have a nice go-around the last time he was with the Rams. So let's see how he ends up this time around. The draft for the Rams, though, was okay, though. They did address some of their needs that was pressing, like guard Steven Avila from TCU. So that addresses at least one spot on the Rams offensive line. They did get another edge rusher in Byron Young from Tennessee. He looks pretty promising. And it gives Von Miller some much needed help finally, hopefully. They also got a defensive tackle in Kobe Turner from Wake Forest, so maybe some interior help. That could also definitely help. So finally, they're addressing some help for Von Miller. Not for Von Miller, for Aaron Donald. So for both of them, I keep saying Von Miller because, he was the one help Aaron Donald needed. So I keep saying that. And then perhaps the biggest move that they made in the draft was getting a quarterback by the name of Stetson Bennett from Georgia. Kind of ironic considering that Stetson Bennett was the guy that led Georgia to the national championship in SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles in that big blowout win over TCU. Kind of weird how I know that. But anyway, and he is on the older side though, but I mean, Does age really matter? I don't know. But hey, at least you have a quarterback that you could potentially develop behind Matthew Stafford when the time comes. So we'll see how that works out for them. So when you look at this Rams offseason, they at least did their due diligence to get Matthew Stafford some help up front and some backup insurance in the form of Stetson Bennett. Whether that pans out or not, we'll see how it works out. But, at least they did their work mostly through the draft. So you can't really blame them too much on that. But again, it's all going to depend on how it pans out in the field. The secondary, though, however, it's going to be a little bit more of a downgrade, obviously, without Jalen Ramsey. You have Kobe Durant on the second option already on the opposite end. But what about the spot that's going to replace Jalen Ramsey? Where's that help going to come from? So they already had trouble covering, even with Jalen Ramsey there the season prior. It's going to get even more troublesome. So looking at some of your potential key games in 2023, obviously it's the first 2 games of the season. You're already going through the division right out of the gates. You're starting week 1 in Seattle, going up against Geno Smith and the Seattle Seahawks, who look to be very improved. And obviously you're going up against your division rival, the 49ers, in your home opener. Even with the quarterback situation yet to be resolved, they're still a pretty good team. So it's a pretty rough sledding in the division early on. And then week 5, you host the Philadelphia Eagles, Jalen Hurts, and the defending NFC champions. Despite a couple key offseason losses, they still look to be a pretty tough out, even if you're hosting them. So not exactly a good schedule for the Rams coming off a injury-riddled season. So my biggest questions for the Rams this season, going into this season, is in the running game, who's going to answer that call? Who's going to be that guy, that top running back in that group? Obviously, you added Sony Michel late in the offseason, but I'm not really sure he's going to help things, but we'll see. Cam Akers, they tried something with him. He got rolling late in the season, but obviously the Rams were just really evaluating by that point. And again, everything was pretty much terrible for Los Angeles well late into the season. So another question I have is, where's the help from Aaron Donald going to come from? Again, even though they drafted all these guys like Byron Young and all that, it's all going to matter on how they translate that onto the field. So after Byron Young and Kobe Turner, where's the rest of the help going to come from? Like in terms of rotation depth. So we'll see how that pans out. So at least for the Rams, at least you have Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp, and Aaron Donald all coming back. Hopefully they stay healthy if you're a Rams fan or if you're the Rams themselves. If they stay healthy, they'll keep them competitive. However, when you're looking at this team, there's some gaping holes that can't be ignored, to be honest with you. That, to be honest, not even these 3 may be able to overcome. Not even Sean McVay may be able to overcome with this coaching. You have a really tough schedule to start out the season with the Seahawks on the road, the 49ers at home, the Eagles at home. Yeah, you could be staring at a very early hole if you're the LA Rams. And even if Stafford, Kupp, and Donald are not playing as well as they did in their Super Bowl run or even early on in the season in 2022, yeah, you can be looking at a pretty bad hole to start the season and could pretty much affect your whole season as in general. So for the Rams, I don't know. Maybe I'll try to be generous. Maybe 7-10, 8-9. I don't know. We'll see, because there's a lot of depth issues with this roster because of all the offseason losses that they had. But hey, you never know what happens in Los Angeles. And for the Rams, it could be a downpour coming, especially with all the offseason turnaround in LA for the Rams. So next we turn to the team that surprised many in 2022 and will now turn to not being so much of a surprise and actually making an impact in 2023, and that is the Seattle Seahawks. When I talked about the Seahawks last year going into the 2022 season, I, like many others, were expecting them to go into full rebuild mode. In the 2022 offseason, they went on to trade Russell Wilson, their longtime starting quarterback, who won them a Super Bowl, to the Denver Broncos. And you're looking at a quarterback situation where you pretty much had Geno Smith. He was like this backup quarterback who didn't really turn out for the New York Jets, and now he's just pretty much everywhere. He was on another team in the Seahawks, and he was competing for the starting spot with Drew Lock, who was one of the victims in the Russell Wilson and Broncos trade. So they were pretty much in this situation. It's like, well, let's look forward to the NFL draft, shall we? That is pretty much that situation with Seattle. However, as it came to the actual season itself, they defied many expectations when Geno Smith had himself a revival season of sorts, leading the team to a surprise playoff berth. He in that offense played surprisingly well. He had a couple of spurts where he didn't do that great late in the season, but nonetheless, they finished the season 9-8. They got the 7th seed. Thanks not only thanks to themselves, but thanks to some help from the Lions. But they eventually fell to the 49ers in the first round of the playoffs. But nonetheless, a pretty successful season, one that surpassed expectations by many. And Geno Smith won Comeback Player of the Year. So you can't really fault Seattle for being that successful in 2022. So obviously going into 2023, the standard is now even higher for Seattle to succeed, to prove that they are no fluke. So for Seattle, your goal is to try to win the NFC West with Geno Smith. Try to be even better. Try to surpass the 49ers as the top team in the division. So will they do that? We'll see. Let's talk about it. So some of your offseason priorities, if you're Seattle going for this season, was to get some major help in the defensive line, because the run defense was terrible. It was awful. They had such a hard time stopping the run that so many running backs were able to just gash them with ease. Just look at Josh Jacobs, for example, in that overtime game between them, the Raiders, and the Seahawks, which was basically the deciding factor in that overtime loss to the Raiders. And then the Week 13 game against the 49ers. Christian McCaffrey, and I also think Elijah Mitchell or whoever was the running back, but they were able to gash the Seahawks run defense with ease. They had to get some major help in the defensive line to plug some holes in their run defense. And, get some better protection for Geno Smith too, because, it was a little decent, a little bit better than what Russell Wilson had, but it could definitely use some improvement. So looking at some of their moves throughout the offseason, obviously the biggest one was re-signing Geno Smith. Now, it wasn't like a big mega deal, but it was one that, let's keep him around for a little bit and see if he can be the guy. So, Seattle was kind of protecting his own ass a little bit of a slight overpay, but not too much that, he's getting like Jalen Hurts money or Patrick Mahomes money or all that, So it was like a 3-year, like $100 million deal, I think, but, not like a massive overpay. They also re-signed Drew Lock. Yes, they need a backup quarterback. Some of the people that they lost, they didn't really lose too many people that's notable anyway. So I think I noted that in my season recap. So you didn't really lose too many people notable. You lost Ryan Neal to the Tampa Bay Bucks. I mean, he was kind of a liability in that Seahawks defense anyway. And running back Rashad Penny to the Philadelphia Eagles. He did pretty well for them until he got hurt 5 games in. But Kenneth Walker stepped up to the plate after he got hurt. So good luck to him in Philadelphia. Some of the pieces that they add in free agency include, thanks to the Rams being stupid as hell, they managed to get Bobby Wagner back in Seattle. Now, how will he do here in the second go around? We'll see. But they did manage to get him back and be a contributor yet again for that Seahawks defense. They also got safety Julian Love from the New York Giants. He was solid in that Giants defense that would frequently get torched. But, he was one gem in that Giants defense. Linebacker Devin Bush from the Pittsburgh Steelers. It didn't really turn out that well for Pittsburgh. So maybe he turns it around here in Seattle. Defensive tackle Draymond Jones from the Denver Broncos. Now, I I don't have really else much to say about Draymond Jones. Like, I don't have any comments at all, but hopefully he pans out well. Hopefully gives them that, that wall that Seattle needs for their run defense. Looking at some of their draft picks, corner Devin Witherspoon from Illinois. A good pick for them because they definitely need some help in the secondary, especially in that that corner spot. So, the more corners, the better for them. And then this pick is definitely interesting for them. Receiver Jackson Smith Nijiba. I'm sorry if I don't pronounce that well, but from Ohio State. So adding another receiver alongside DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, and maybe he could be the successor, the man that surpasses Lockett whenever he retires. Like, I mean, come on, Lockett's not getting that younger. But nonetheless, excuse me, Smith Neva could be a definite weapon. It could be a good third option for now for Geno Smith, as long as Geno Smith, of course, plays well too. They also got an edge rusher by the name of Derek Hall, so he could definitely be helpful too in the pass rush. And another running back by the name of Zach Charbonnet, so maybe a backup behind Kenneth Walker. So for Seattle this offseason, they did a pretty nice job addressing the defense. They got all these people in, so it should definitely help their pass rushing situation. Now the run defense, we'll see how that plays out for them. For the offense, like I said, it could be a deadly quartet. Like I said, Jackson Smith, if he can play to his potential, he looks like a good vertical threat alongside DK Metcalf and Lockett. Holy heck, if Geno Smith plays well, then teams should be careful with that. And my other takeaway is, it was a little surprising for Seattle not to use one of its pick on a quarterback, but maybe they wait till next year. But a little surprising there. Looking at some of their potential key games in 2023, obviously it's in week 2 against the Detroit Lions on the road. You get to see how that fares for them in their first road test. And then perhaps a big test in week 5 on the road against Cincinnati. Joe Burrow and that offense, see how that defense handles Joe Burrow. So it's going to be interesting how the defense is going to be able to pressure them up. And then week 12 versus the 49ers at home on Thanksgiving. It's a big division rivalry game on prime time. And then week 15 against the Philadelphia Eagles. So it's at home and you're going up against the NFC champions. So yeah, the pressure should be on not just both of them, but especially to the home team by that point. And who knows what kind of spot they'll be in by that point. It'll be competing for a playoff spot, or maybe for the division, or just trying to stay alive by that point. Some of your biggest questions for Seattle going into 2023, obviously the biggest one being is that can Geno Smith prove that 2022 wasn't just an aberration? Was it not a fluke? So for Geno Smith, there's plenty to prove going to 2023. The front office gave you all the support. They gave you a big fat new contract, kinda. But no, seriously, they gave you a little bit of help on the offensive line. They gave you a new third receiver. So now it's time for you to go and prove that 2022 was no joke. That you can be at least a viable starter for the next however many couple of years until they can find your successor. So Geno Smith has to prove that last year was no fluke, that he could still be their starter for the next few years. And then obviously, like I said before, can these offseason additions translate to on-field success, especially on the defensive side? Because, Seattle sometimes makes these good moves, but they don't always translate well when it comes to the actual product. So who knows? Who knows how it turns out? So for Seattle, like I said, last year was no joke. Neither was their offseason. They made a good amount of quality moves, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Had a solid free agency, had an even better draft. that gave them much needed depth on both sides of the ball. The biggest question is going to be how Geno Smith and the team handles what is going to be a much tougher schedule this year, and how those depth pieces, how those moves will pay off on the field, especially considering now teams have film on what Geno Smith did. Now that they can key in on his biggest weaknesses. So it'll be not on just Geno Smith, but on Pete Carroll to assure that they can navigate through that, have Pete Carroll, play up to his biggest strengths. So it's going to be, I don't know if I can say about the Seattle Seahawks. Maybe a bit of the same, more of the same this year for Seattle. Maybe 9-8, the exact same record that they got. But teams are definitely going to figure out Seattle. So it's going to be on Seattle to adjust, make those adjustments, and ride the wave, and hopefully try to make that playoff spot again. So the final team that we're going to be talking about here today in part 1 of our NFL season preview month is, well, of course, the team that finished first in the NFC West, and that is, of course, my team, the San Francisco 49ers. Now, normally I would talk about them first, but the first is the worst, or the first is the best. We saved the best for last, ladies and gentlemen, this time around. And for my 49ers, oh man, there was definitely a lot to talk about. Not just from last season, but going into this season. So where do we even begin? I haven't talked about my team since, well, their season ended back in February. So I guess I'll try to dissect this down into the best Cliff Notes way I can possible. So for 2022 last year, when we're sitting here last year, it was supposed to be all about Trey Lance, all about ushering in the Trey Lance era, right? Gone was supposed to be Jimmy Garoppolo, or as I used to call him, Jimmy Garbage Fail. But thanks to some Shanahanism, or as I like to call it, Trey Lance got hurt 2 games in, and then in came the guy that the 49ers just refused to release before the season started, in Jimmy Garoppolo. And while he had a very bad start in his first couple games in, he actually managed to do okay in the 49ers. I think it was 10-game winning streak before he got hurt himself. And then he was also lost for the season. And then now with no other quarterback to turn to, Kyle Shanahan in week 13 had to turn to Mr. Irrelevant, Brock Purdy. We didn't really know what exactly we had in him, but he had no other choice. In a game against the Miami Dolphins, we had to turn to him because, well, Jimmy G got hurt on the first play of that game. And then, boy, he shocked the world with how quickly he stepped up to the plate, smoothly moved the offense. And then from there, it was just all of a sudden, that was no fluke. He went on to beat the likes of the Bucs, the Seahawks. And then he went on to just, I wouldn't say amazed, but he's just like, man, this guy is actually pretty good. And then he went on to lead the 49ers to wins in the wild card and divisional game. And then we get to the NFC Championship game. He gets hurt. And then Josh Johnson, their 4th-string quarterback of all people, gets hurt too. Then that leaves us with no quarterbacks. The Niners are left defenseless in an NFC Championship game in Philadelphia against the Eagles. 1 game away from the Super Bowl, and we fall short yet again. You finish the season 13-4. You win the NFC West, but for what? For what? You're one game short yet again for the 2nd straight year. But I think I said this in my NFC title game review. This one really hurt more so than the one against the Rams, because it's just like, man, we literally had no shot. We literally had no shot to win this at all because, well, we had no quarterbacks. We had nothing to fight them against. If Brock Purdy was still in there, hey, he at least would have made it close. But damn, there was literally no shot in that game. So anyway, obviously going into this offseason for the 49ers, your goal for 2023 was to figure out the starting quarterback and keep them healthy all year and finally get them back to the promised land in one piece. one piece only. And that, of course, was the Super Bowl. Like, no NFC Championship appearance. Like, oh, just making it short. Like, oh, we did well. You got there to the NFC Championship game. No, get to the Super Bowl and win the damn thing in one piece. Damn it. So anyway, when you look at some of their offseason events for the 49ers, obviously Brock Purdy was injured, having the injured elbow in his throwing arm. He went on to have the elbow surgery in March, and from what I've read so far, he's apparently well ahead of schedule and currently on track to play in Week 1. So that's good news. But then we get to the most interesting part of the quarterback situation. More of that later. You lose defensive coordinator DeMeco Ryans because he becomes the head coach with the Houston Texans. So no DeMeco Ryans anymore, ladies and gentlemen. And then now we transition back to the quarterback position. All the media crap talk on Trey Lance. It's like, oh, the Niners don't trust in Trey Lance anymore. Oh, he's going to become the third string quarterback. Oh, they're going to trade his ass. It's like what the fuck are we doing here? It's like, are we that bored in free agency? Do we have nothing to talk about anymore? Like, did we just suddenly give up on Trey Lance? Like, are we watching the same thing? Like, or am I just that filthy casual? Like, have I not been paying attention that much? Have I been avoiding 49ers Twitter all offseason long because, well, I've actually been watching the Bloodline story on WWE? I don't know. Either way, like, what has been going on with Trey Lance? Because what I've seen with Trey Lance on Twitter or Instagram, wherever it may be, he looks fine. He looks fine. He needs to be given a chance, people. It's called give Trey Lance a chance to compete for the starting role. Like, what is this bullshit? So anyway, when it comes to team needs for the 49ers from this past offseason, obviously one of the biggest ones was finding that successor to the DeMeco Ryans, which they did with former Panthers interim coach Steve Wilks. So Steve Wilks, during his interim coaching tenure with the Panthers last season, he actually did pretty decently with that defense. And, you know, he nearly got the Panthers to a playoff berth because, well, the NFC South was terrible, but the defense, you know, it did a number on a couple of teams, including Tom Brady on like twice. Sure, it led to a season split, but, you know, going head to head with Tom Brady twice and like trying and limiting him as much as you could, you know, that's no joke. So you bring in former Panthers interim coach Steve Wilks. He's the successor, so that's at least something. The biggest priority on offense, though, was prioritizing that offensive line because, my God, that's what led to the whole injury to Brock Purdy in the first place. And the injuries to all the quarterbacks. Trey Lance gets hurt because, well, mainly because Kyle Shanahan's dumbass play calling week 2, but it's also the offensive line because of all the hits he took. And then Jimmy Garoppolo gets hurt because, well, he got sacked like numerous times during the season. And then Brock Purdy gets hurt because, well, they just decided to use a 2 tight end set in the NFC Championship game. It's like, what the hell, man? That just proves that our offensive line absolutely sucked in 2022. So I mentioned that you need to prioritize the offensive line this offseason. Go get some people to protect him or whoever was going to be the starting quarterback. Speaking of quarterback, you needed to find a quarterback while Brock Purdy was out. So let's look at some of the moves that they made during the offseason. And did it make the Niners better? Did it make the Niners work? Or just in the middle? Let's take a look. Some of the people that they re-signed was center Jake Brendel. I mean, he was solid, but we'll see how he turns out. And if he can step up to the plate. They also re-signed offensive lineman Colton McKivitz. Yeah, good luck with that one. Free safeties, Tashawn Gibson. I think Tashawn Gibson was actually pretty solid in the safety rotation, so not a bad signing. Some of the people that they did lose, however, was free safety Jimmy Ward to the Houston Texans. So, man, they weren't able to keep him, but still a big loss nonetheless. They also lost edge rusher Samson Epicon to the Colts, corner Emmanuel Mosley to the Detroit Lions. Like, man, I'm just a little upset that they weren't able to keep him at a discount because he was coming off the ACL injury. But, oh well. Linebacker Azeez Al-Shaair went to the Titans. right tackle Mike McGlinchey, thank God, went to the Denver Broncos. Let him be Russell Wilson's problem now because he was a penalty machine. Like, holy hell. So let him go be Russell Wilson's problem. And then one of the biggest losses that the Niners occurred was Jimmy Garoppolo going to the Las Vegas Raiders. So, I mean, go get that money, Jimmy G. Respect you as a person, but as a player, go play somewhere else. Like we kind of liked what you did, but then a lot of the times, no. Some of the people they did as during both free agency and the draft. The biggest move that they made was adding a defensive tackle by the name of Javon Hargrave from the Eagles. So he was a really good interior defensive lineman for them in the pass rush in the interior. So adding him in the interior alongside Eric Armstead is definitely going to help him out. So it should also help out that pass rush as well. They also added a backup edge rusher in Clinton Farrell. He was a big bust for the Raiders, but who knows? Maybe he can revive his career here in San Francisco. They also added a corner by the name of Isaiah Oliver. Pretty solid from the Falcons. Center John Feliciano, so maybe he'll be competing or maybe be a rotation piece in the center position. And then the biggest one that everyone was jizzing about throughout the offseason, I kept reading about this too. Sam Darnold followed Steve Wilkes from the Panthers. Yeah. So apparently, there's this whole QB competition between Sam Darnold and Trey Lance. Yeah, that's a thing. So maybe, I don't know. At this point, let's just get on with it. So the draft. As I mentioned, my draft episode for the 49ers, they didn't have a lot of draft capital because of the Trey Lance trade and the Christian McCaffrey trade too. So they didn't have a lot of resources here. But they did make a decent amount of picks, starting with safety Jair Brown. I thought that was a really good pick for them. And then people questioned this pick a lot, but I think it was okay for them with this spot. Kicker Jake Moody from Michigan. And I also heard that he's been doing pretty well. Excuse me. In OTAs and minicamp. So that's good progress there. Corner Darrell Luter from South Alabama. So he could be a solid corner rotation piece. And receiver Ronnie Bell from Alabama. So we'll see how that pans out. So for my 49ers, during this offseason, there's a lot of mixed results and a lot of takeaways from all my ranting so far. Looks like Brock Purdy is progressing well in his elbow rehab. So, like I said, he looks like he's on track to play week 1 in Pittsburgh. But it also looks like Trey Lance has shown major improvement in OTAs and mandatory minicamp. Obviously, the biggest test is yet to come with training camp and the preseason. So Trey Lance still has plenty tests to go, plenty of auditions to pass if he wants to hold the starting spot down away from Brock Purdy. So that remains to be seen. Otherwise, I don't know what you do at this point. I mean, I really want to give Trey Lance a chance. Like, I'm really one of those guys that really hopes that Trey Lance gets a chance. But it's just a really like, I don't see like, oh, he should just get traded, but it's like one of those really difficult situations, you know. And then the corner group, at least it looks to be a little bit better. At least now you have all these rotation pieces alongside, I can't remember the names, but you at least now have some pieces in that cornerback group. Last year, when pieces were starting to fall apart, it really fell apart when it did. But the offensive line, however, is still a serious question mark. Like, that was their biggest priority in the offseason. How hard was it for them to find a solution at right tackle to compete with Burford and McKivitz? I get it. You didn't have much money, but get something. Get something in the draft. Why was it so hard? Like, weren't there plenty of guards or linemen in the draft? I don't know. Do something with linemen, guard. Are they trying to get whoever lines up under center killed again in 2023? Come on. So looking at some of their potential key games of 2023, obviously you start in Pittsburgh in week 1, and then you continued that with the road trip down back west to the Rams in week 2. So another one of those two game road trips to start the season, but you cap that off with a 3-game homestand, I believe, to begin the season. But so it's another one of those things in odd years. So yeah, it's always like that. You get a big test in week 8 against the Cincinnati Bengals at home. So playing against Joe Burrow and that Cincy offense. So that defense is definitely going to get a test. Then after Thanksgiving against the Seattle Seahawks on the road, you have to go to Philadelphia to play the Philadelphia Eagles in a rematch of the NFC title game. So that's going to be a very big game. So how are the Eagles going to be at that point? How are the Niners going to be at that point? What is their playoff status going to be? If they're in playoff contention, we shall see. And then a rematch from Thanksgiving, week 14, you're hosting the Seahawks. Again, what are those teams going to be at by that point in the NFC West? So looking at some of these questions that I have for the 49ers entering 2023, obviously the biggest one of all, the most obvious one of all is going to be, which quarterback is Kyle Shanahan going to acknowledge as his QB1? Who's going to be his tribal chief under center? Is it going to be Trey Lance or Brock Purdy? Or hell, let's just do fuck all, and is it going to be Sam Darnold? Like, how did we end up in this mess? So, I don't know. Maybe if Brock Purdy's fully healthy, maybe he starts. But then, how's he going to look? He hasn't thrown. He is throwing. He is throwing in his throwing sessions, but like actual game action, let's see how that. I'm curious to see how that pans out. And then the offensive line obviously has a lot of questions, so I talked about that enough in length. So while I'm glad Kyle Shanahan finally has no longer like in case of injury, break the Jimmy G glass to rely on anymore, he now has a larger problem at hand. Is it going to be Brock Purdy or is it going to be Trey Lance that starts? And I don't know if I can say if it's a good problem to have because, well, you kind of don't know what they have to offer because Trey Lance doesn't have a good sample size. Brock Purdy has a good sample size now, and teams have film on him. So if he doesn't perform well, and Trey Lance also doesn't perform well, oof. And apparently, many of the media, whether it be local or national, love media. Not love media. They love Brock Purdy, but they hate Trey Lance. I don't know, man. It's just a whole absurd situation all around. So overall, whether or not Brock Purdy is ready to go in week 1 in Pittsburgh, you got to give Trey Lance a chance. You got to give him a shot to start as a starter. This season, because, obviously last season he got hurt. This season is now the time to do it. If he is the guy to be the starter this season and maybe even down the road, awesome. If he isn't, bummer. Go back to Brock Purdy. But like I said, if Purdy is also not the answer, then we have a bigger problem. But until Brock Purdy is healthy, we'll get to that problem. For now, in my opinion, it's Trey Lance's show until otherwise. Now, as for their overall season, I think they'll still win the NFC West. It's pretty bold to stay at this point. There'll be a little bit of a slight regression because of the quarterback issue, but I say they go 12-5. Let's get that bold. So, yeah. Niners got to fix this quarterback problem, real soon. So there you have it. That is the end of part 1 of my 2023 NFL season previews. We obviously covered the NFC West to begin our kickoff of the 2023 NFL season preview month. Then that was, of course, the 4 teams in the division: the Arizona Cardinals, the Seattle Seahawks, the LA Rams, and my San Francisco 49ers. If you're a fan of either of these teams, let me know your own thoughts on how these teams will perform this upcoming season and your own expectations for them. So I'd like to know your thoughts. Let's start a discussion, whether it's in the comments on YouTube or on social media, on Twitter and Instagram at Very Cold Lasagna. I'd like to see if you either agree with me or you just want to roast me for my own terrible takes on either of these teams. So I'd like to see what you guys have to think. So let's start a conversation, shall we? So anyway, that is it for this episode of Very Cold Lasagna and part 1 of our season preview month with the NFC West. Part 2, we'll be covering the NFC North and the teams over there up north in that snowy division. That's pretty much wide open at this point, but we'll talk about that in the next episode. So anyway, this is Dylan Lasagna signing out of another episode and part 1 of our season previews. And until next time, keep that lasagna very cold in the fridge with your takes on the world of sports. And peace out.